Hello, everyone. My name is Charlie Panfil. I'm the Executive Director of Friends of Intelligent Democracy PAC, the first hybrid PAC run by college students. And thank you so much for being with us tonight for another candidate Q&A tonight with State Representative Jon Hoadley, who is running in Michigan's 6th Congressional District. We are so happy to have you on tonight, Jon.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Great. So before I turn it over to him, just going to introduce him to our audience. Jon Hoadley is running for Congress because he believes in putting people and community at the center of decision making. For the past 5 years, he has served as a state representative for the 60th District in Michigan, representing over 90,000 people living in Kalamazoo and Kalamazoo Township. As a small business owner, he knows the pressure of making a payroll and providing healthcare. He has worked hard to give a voice to equality organizations, labor groups, women's rights organizations, and environmental causes. Through coalition work, he has helped hundreds of thousands of Michiganders and folks across the country win important fights. When he was elected to serve as state representative, he championed a consistent set of ideas: investing in education for today and tomorrow, building an economy that works for everyone, and fighting for social justice in a clean environment. Jon Hoadley is running for Congress because he believes it's time we put people and community back at the center of decisions. It's time we face the future and our country's challenges head on with fresh ideas. Thanks so much, Jon, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, Charlie, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for everybody who's joining us today. Great introduction. You know, we are, 18 days now from the election. It is, voters are voting here in Michigan, and I'm hoping that with your help, we can be able to reach more voters who have yet to make up their mind in this really important toss-up race. But let me just take a step back and tell you a little bit about me and how I got into this. You know, I was born and raised in Vermillion, South Dakota. And I started my work advocating for LGBTQ equality issues. I remember, what it was like coming out in South Dakota. And this was before marriage equality was the law of the land through the Supreme Court decisions. This was before the recent decisions that prohibited discrimination. And you know what that journey taught me and the work taught me was that when we come together and we tell our authentic stories, we share about our lives and how policy impacts our lives, we can make huge change. And I then put that stuff to work. I put that idea to work. I went to school at Michigan State University. So shout out to all the Spartans that are watching. And then I started finding ways to make sure that I could continue to help other folks make big change. So for me, one thing that I found myself working on about 11 years ago was in Kalamazoo, we had the One Kalamazoo campaign. It was a chance to protect our city's non-discrimination ordinances. This idea that if you should be judged on the quality of your work, not who you are or who you love, and that regardless of who you love or who you are, that you should get to live, work, and play with freedom and dignity in the places that you live. And we won that campaign. And from then, I made Kalamazoo my home. I started a business here. And so like Charlie was saying, I know what it's like to have to make a payroll, to worry about invoices, paying health insurance. And 6 years ago, I was elected as the state representative in Kalamazoo. And that was so incredible because what we ended up doing is taking those skills that I learned on equality and start applying them to so many other issues. You know, coming from a family of teachers and educators, we needed more legislators who were going to say no to special interest tax giveaways that were robbing money from our school. We needed folks who were going to stand up and support the environment, clean energy, our drinking water. And I've been proud as a state legislator to be able to do that. For the last 6 years, I've served on the Appropriations Committee. And so that's building our state's $60 billion budget. Recently, this current term, I've been able to be the minority vice chair. That's like the ranking Democrat on the committee, and helped as we navigated very difficult budget times in the state, but still found a way to make sure that we were investing in things that people care about: equity in our schools, finding money to help deal with dangerous dams, finding money to help clean up the environment, and working to make sure that healthcare, mental health, and other important issues were getting support. But I say all this because I didn't realize I was going to have to put all those skills that I've learned to use advocating for other people to advocate for my own family. So 3 years ago, I came home from a day in Lansing, and my partner, Chris, was on the floor. He was laying in the bathroom. He'd been throwing up for 18 hours. And the first thing we did was have a fight about whether we were going to call an ambulance or not, because ambulances are expensive. I won that fight, and we got him to the hospital. They ran tests. They got him stabilized. He was, but then he said, "Doc, I'm still seeing double." And they said, "That's not what you came in for. You have to leave." And talk about the state of healthcare in America. And, that fortunately we were able to get him into his doctor, his primary care doctor, the next day, who then sent us immediately back to the emergency room. And for more tests, more labs, blood work, MRIs with contrast, MRIs without contrast, until finally the doctor came in later that night and said, "Chris, you have multiple sclerosis." And for anybody that's had that moment where someone you love gets really bad news, you know that the questions feel so big and you personally feel so small as a caregiver. And we were able to get him into the hospital, start him on treatment, but then I had to spend all those advocacy skills making sure that I was advocating to get into the right doctors, making sure that fighting with the insurance company, who too often have so much more say over the treatment than you or your doctor, talking about making sure he was getting the right treatment and the right prescription medications. The good news is that Chris is doing well because we found a prescription drug that is keeping him healthy. But every year there's the question, will that medication still be covered by his insurance plan? If we lost his health insurance, that medication would cost $7,200 a month. I mean, who can afford that? And we're still always every year having questions about, should we get another MRI? Should we see how things are progressing? Because they're expensive and it'll max out his healthcare costs every single year. And unfortunately, families are like mine are so similar to families all across Southwest Michigan and frankly all across the country that are dealing with healthcare costs that are too high, that worry about if they'll even be able to have healthcare. And that's just on top of the challenges that we face on other issues: access to long-term care, access to childcare, dealing with our environment, tackling racism and structural inequality. I mean, these are things that the country has been calling out for answers, and for too long, we've heard no solutions. So here's the deal. We're in the last 18 days, and I'm running against a guy who's been there for 34 years. He's had 17 terms to deliver on these number one issues that voters and families keep saying we need to see change on, and we haven't. So if you can't change the mind of the person who's sitting in the seat, then change who's sitting in the seat. And that's why I need your help. People are voting right now in Michigan, and we know that there are tens of thousands of people who know they're going to vote and don't know who they're going to vote for yet. So the calls that you're going to make, that you could help us with, the funding you can do so we can continue to reach other voters, will make a difference in this election. But I do want to just say thank you to everybody who has stepped up and helped already. We've broken records in this district. We've been able to reach more voters than any campaign before. We've raised more money than any campaign before. And we're on the DCCC's red to blue list. So we're one of the most competitive seats in the entire country. And I'll say one more thing before we go to questions. This race isn't just about flipping one more seat in Congress. You should know how important it is to flip this seat to turn out more voters in Southwest Michigan. This is an area where Michigan has a must-win U.S. Senate seat. We have to win and reelect Gary Peters so we can stop Mitch McConnell. And those voters are going to be found in Southwest Michigan. We have to get Biden and Harris over the finish line because Michigan kind of messed that up 4 years ago. And we can do that by finding those voters in Southwest Michigan. And if you care about state legislative races, there's 3 of the consistently top 10 state legislative races are in this congressional district. So you could also help flip a state legislature to make sure that we're sending a chamber to go help advocate with Governor Whitmer for the health and safety of Michigan. And last but not least, in the event that there are hijinks, that no candidate fails to reach 270 votes, then one of the first things the new Congress would do would vote by state delegations for who the next president will be. Michigan currently has a tied delegation, 7 Democrats and then 7 conservatives. And by flipping just this one seat, we'd be able then to cast a vote as a delegation to support Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So, I mean, no pressure, but all the roads to the White House, the Senate, a majority, democracy runs through this district. So I need your help. And I'm excited for the conversation today. So thank you so much for being here. Charlie, I may have lost you there.
Oh, am I good?
There we go. Yep.
Okay, great. I just first, before we start questions, I just want to say thank you, especially for your advocacy for the LGBTQ community. I came out as bi on my 18th birthday, and thankfully after Obergefell v. Hodges and things like that, and it's leaders like you who created the political environment and created the advocacy environment that makes it comfortable for young LGBTQ people like me to feel that we can be ourselves. So again, just wanted to say thank you. So my first question is going to go on to COVID, which is obviously the hot topic of this year and probably many years to come, and related to the basic public health practices that everyone should be participating in, but we're sadly not seeing. So do you think that wearing a mask has become a political statement, and what are the dangers of politicizing public health?
So unfortunately, wearing a mask seems to be political. Although I will say, when I talk to the vast majority of Michiganders and when you do polling on this, most people understand how important it is to wear a mask. And I think this is, by the way, then showing this disconnect that the vast majority of people in our country do want leaders who will listen to science, who do want folks who will follow public health best practices and advice. Unfortunately, there are some folks who have tried to politicize this aspect of public health and others. I'm actually really excited. Dr. Matt Longjohn and I are doing a talk about this next week in public health. But here's the truth. Governor Whitmer, who was the subject of a foiled kidnapping attempt recently, was front and center on following the science and making the tough decisions to actually then support public health. And we see then how the rhetoric that was coming out of the White House and frankly emboldened by either the support or the silence of so many Republican leaders ultimately created an environment that has slowed our progress on COVID-19. And America, regardless of your political affiliation, pays the price. I mean, there'll be over 200,000 families who won't have someone they love come home for Thanksgiving or Christmas this year because of COVID-19. We've lost them to COVID-19. And there will be businesses that had to stay closed longer because we didn't follow the science sooner. There are kids who are going to be behind in learning because we didn't follow the science sooner. And there's going to be communities that will take years to recover because the Trump administration didn't have a comprehensive plan. And so, I think at the end of the day, we need folks to say loudly that they support science. There is danger if we continue to politicize public health. And I hope that we send a message really loud and clear that America supports science and public health, and we're going to elect leaders who do too.
No, exactly. And I think too, the idea that, I live in Toledo, Ohio, so just right over the line from Michigan. And it was insane to see white supremacists and armed, people with AK-47s walking where you work.
I was there that day.
Exactly. And it's just the idea that those people were there protesting the objectively correct thing to do in protecting Michiganders, people traveling in and out of state, and also just Americans in general.
And look, I believe in the First Amendment strongly, which is why I will support people's right to protest. But that being said, what we also know is the images and the message that were being encouraged by that through those rallies where some of the attempted kidnappers met were being encouraged by leadership coming from the White House to Republican legislative leaders. And we even found out that on the day of some of the largest protests, when folks stormed the Capitol with guns, that the Republican Speaker of the House offered security to his caucus and a heads up and didn't tell our caucus. So we know that there are problems, and we should not be politicizing these types of issues this way. We should look to encourage calm, not chaos. And that's going to take a change in leadership.
Exactly. And on a similar issue, the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed inequities, whether in healthcare, the criminal, our racial and socioeconomic systems, things like that. But especially the healthcare conversation has become even more important than it already is, especially now that 7 million plus Americans will now have a pre-existing condition from COVID. And so what do you think is the biggest reform we can make to our healthcare system aside from affordability? Affordability is always discussed, but there are other components to the American healthcare system that are sometimes left out of the conversation.
So let me just say the first thing we have to do is make sure we don't fall backwards. I mean, the Supreme Court is going to hear a case that could repeal the Affordable Care Act days after the election. So when folks like myself say healthcare is on the ballot, we mean that the Supreme Court is going to make a choice that could roll back the protections that so many folks take for granted now. Coverage for pre-existing conditions, being able to stay on your parents' health insurance until you're 26, no lifetime caps on insurance coverage. These basic pieces that unfortunately could go away. And so, for me, when I think though about what's the next innovation after preserving these where we're at right now, I think the biggest innovation could be making sure that your healthcare isn't tied to your job. And here's why. Millions of Americans lost their job during a global health pandemic through no fault of their own and lost their healthcare at the same time. I mean, how backwards is that? I was meeting with entrepreneurs in Benton Harbor, and every one of them was talking about how they had an incredible idea, that they had a business that they were trying to make thrive, but they always had to treat it as their side hustle because they had to have a job that got them health insurance, right? So we've created a system where during a health pandemic, you could lose your health care. We've created a system that disadvantages American businesses compared to other parts of the world. We've created a system here that actually holds back entrepreneurship and reduces our freedom, because so many people are stuck in a job that they may not like, or may not be their passion, or may not even pay as well as another job. But because their healthcare, their children's healthcare, or loved ones' healthcare is dependent on that job, that they're stuck. And I don't want America to be stuck. I support freedom, and I want us to be able to unleash and unlock innovation. And step one is saying that if we start decoupling your healthcare from your job, that could help everybody.
Exactly. And I think, what has been surprising for me in this issue, especially as a young person, right? With Obamacare, I'm able to stay, I'm 20 years old, able to stay on my parents' health insurance until I'm 26. But the idea too that Republicans are refusing, cost-effective solutions, refusing, legally feasible solutions, all in the name of trying to keep money in certain places, again, just doesn't even line up with what their own party says they stand for as well, which again, I think is mind-boggling, not only to me and my team, but I think to Americans across the country. Healthcare in 2018 was considered the most important issue to midterm voters. And I think a lot of it just comes down to the American people aren't dumb. They're not, you can't fool them. So trying to do this smoke and mirrors thing with them isn't going to work on healthcare. And before we move on away from healthcare, I just want to say one last thing is that, we've done over a dozen of these events with different candidates all across the country. And overwhelmingly, almost all of them talk about either their own healthcare or their family's healthcare being the reason they got in the race. And I just think the idea that, Republican or Democrat, that so many candidates, their inspiration is, the failings of the American healthcare system, just by itself serves as an indicator that something needs to change.
Well, healthcare is life and death, right? And the reason that everybody feels so passionately about healthcare is because almost everybody has a story about a life saved or a life lost. And I take that responsibility really seriously. And I also want to remind people that the difference between me and the candidate I'm running against is so clear on this issue. I believe more people should have healthcare. He has voted over 60 times to take it away. I believe that you should be covered for pre-existing conditions. He willfully voted 12 times to deny coverage for pre-existing conditions. I think that your prescription drugs should be affordable and they should be lower priced. He voted against lowering the price of prescription drugs. So despite all the talk or the ability to try to obfuscate what happens here in this issue, this is a clear-cut issue. And, people can tell you whatever they want, but you got to look at what they actually do. And this is an issue where Fred Upton kept voting the wrong way on healthcare, and now we should vote for someone different in office.
100%. Couldn't agree with you more on that one. So my next question changes topic to another issue extremely important, not only to young people like myself, but should be important to not only the United States, but also the globe. And that is Gen Z and younger millennials like myself have been leading the fight for climate justice and against a climate crisis that my generation was born into. How do you plan on supporting their message and actions in Congress when you get there in January?
Yeah, we need to see big change when it comes to the climate crisis and frankly, so many environmental issues. I'm proud to be endorsed by groups like the Sunrise Movement because not only am I ready to, and I have a track record of standing up for the environment, but I'm taking on a guy who doesn't. And in fact, given when he had the gavel to make major change as the chair of Energy and Commerce, routinely empowered fossil fuel companies, entrusted them to do what's best for the earth when we know that they weren't. So here's the deal. We need to see, I like to put it in a couple of different buckets, but we need to see bold action when it comes to the existential threat of the climate crisis. We've got a shot clock on how many, less than 9 years to get this right. So we've got to take change now. And here, some people try to use that as a way to scare folks, but we're talking about major investment in green jobs and green infrastructure. In Southwest Michigan, that could be energy production that can't be outsourced or offshored. We could be creating energy efficiency and laying new green infrastructure that at the same time could also be improving our drinking water and at the same time even lay rural broadband, which would help people connect to the internet. The second big bucket I talk about, though, is we do need to protect and enhance our groundwater and our air. These are environmental justice issues, and we know that they disproportionately impact communities of color. We also know that families in my area have told me how they buy bottled water for their babies because they don't trust the water that's coming out of their tap. They're worried about lead from the faucet or PFAS in their wells. And, this is the result of corporate polluters who have been given a free pass to dump toxic contamination in our grounds and our groundwater. Gen Z is going to have to double down on cleaning up the mess of generations past. And we need to then put people in Congress who are actually going to help to fund and support that cleanup effort. And then the last thing I talk about is, in terms of once we deal with climate crisis, we deal with clean air and clean water, we really do need to start having greater accountability for the folks that have got us to this point. We need to hold corporate polluters accountable. We need to make sure that we're following the science, that we're asking a higher level of standards before people can just willfully put things out in the world that could cause harm to our environment or others. So those are kind of things, I think, in three big buckets. I've got a 100% lifetime score from the League of Conservation Voters, Sierra Club, and Clean Water Action, and I want to keep that record up in Congress.
Awesome. All right. So for the next set of questions, I'm going to turn over to Alex, who is our political director.
Hey, Alex.
Hey, John. Thank you so much for being here tonight. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, time has been tough for everyone, and working families have been hit especially hard. So going forward, in your opinion, what do you think are the best ways to support Michigan's working families and improve work standards and wage protections for low-income or minimum wage workers?
Yeah, this one is, I think those two different sides of, I think, a really important issue. So let's talk COVID first. We need to pass a stimulus bill that is going to help families. And I know that there's been a lot of back and forth. I want to see action on this bill. It has to have components that are going to provide direct relief for families, that will support small businesses who employ the vast number of Americans. It has to have support for our state and local units of government, because those are institutions that provide local services. Our first responders, teachers, are oftentimes funded through state and local funding. And we also need to make sure that we are specifically supporting our schools and educational institutions moving forward. Now, this is in addition to, of course, comprehensive public health funding for contact tracing, for testing, for PPE. But when we do those types of activities, that's going to help working families, because for so many of our policies, we've put a Band-Aid or we've pushed a pause button, but we're still going to have to make it up in the future. Where direct relief for families, unemployment benefits, stimulus checks, those sort of pieces are going to be critical to getting us to the other side of this. And winter's coming right now. Winter is coming, and what it means though for most families is that that we really do have to help, as heating bills are going to go up. You can't be outside as much as you could in the summer, etc. Now, moving forward though, I think this undercuts the COVID-19 crisis undercut some of the long-term changes that we need to see in many of our workplaces. The reality is that so many of the lowest paid jobs were deemed essential, which tells us that some of our lowest paid workers are taking on the greatest risk from a public health perspective. We need to make sure that we are providing a living wage. We need to make sure that we are lifting up safety, health and safety standards in our workplace. Second, as we saw these issues move forward, we saw that so many employers were doing the right thing by their employees, being accommodating, helping them do their jobs, providing PPE. And we also saw that there were plenty that were not. But the protections that those employees had, the workers had, to report these and then have someone follow up their complaints are oftentimes very limited. There's been a comprehensive effort by many Republicans in state legislatures and federal government to make sure that they were cutting funding to the folks that were supposed to hold people accountable on these issues. So we need to make sure that we reinvigorate the set of protections that are supposed to be there to hold employers accountable, to make sure that they're following the rules, just like we're expected to do. Additionally, I do think that we saw a huge number of workers who were told for so many years that they couldn't do their job remotely. There was absolutely no way they could. And then almost overnight, we figured out a way for them to do it remotely. I hope that we both can keep some of the flexibility or innovation moving forward, because for so many jobs, that actually helped. Cut down on commutes, which helped the environment and save families time. There could be opportunities for hybrid pieces moving forward. But then let's also make sure we're creating appropriate new laws that recognize the changing nature of work. So virtual work has protections. So we're not building all of our worker protections based on laws that made sense 60, 70 years ago and haven't always kept up with the changing pace of how the future of work looks.
Yeah, I think we've seen historically that some of America's greatest innovations have come on the heels of massive crises. You see after the Great Recession, you see all these amazing app and gig-based economy changes. I think that we need leaders like you who are going to be able to take this disaster and find some silver lining and create some opportunities to reshape our economy, make sure it works for everyone and is fair. So shifting subjects here, over the summer, America has faced a reckoning on race. Following these absolutely historic protests, what are your thoughts on the Black Lives Matter movement, and how do you plan on addressing racial equity and civil rights in Congress?
I mean, there's a few things here. First, Black Lives Matter, and we have to keep saying that until policy outcomes prove that's also true. I mean, that's the thing. I think it's one thing to say it, but now we have to make sure that we make those words ring true, because in so many instances, whether it's racial disparities in health, racial disparities in economic outcomes, racial disparities in the criminal justice system, racial disparities in education, that we say these things, that everyone should be equal, that we should have equal justice under law, but that has not been the outcomes. And so I've been really proud of folks like Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist, who has done incredible work on the COVID-19 task force, racial disparities task force, to start looking at ways that we can deal with systematic and systemic inequality that exists across significant institutions. So, I'm someone that has built a track record of doing this work. I was proud to support equity funding issues that we're looking that looks at equity funding in education, that deals with the legacies of income inequality, that deals with access issues, and starts tackling the issues that we know disproportionately impact women of color and people of color. I mean, for example, I was proud to help champion Governor Whitmer's Healthy Babies, Healthy Moms initiative. And what that did is it's a dramatic step forward that deals with both prenatal health, but then also expands healthcare for moms postpartum and their babies for a full year. And when you look at the fact that, even in our own backyard here in Kalamazoo, infant mortality rates almost 2 to 1 based on race. And so your zip code should, in your skin color, should not determine the likelihood in which your baby will survive the first year of its life. That is tragic, and it is failing in America until we fix it. So I think the protests that we saw across the country reinvigorated and brought to the forefront a conversation that has been happening for decades, for centuries, and reminds us that the work that needs to be done is not done yet. Now, here's the other thing. I think it was great that we saw political leaders, say statements, change their Facebook page. We saw corporations make statements like Black Lives Matter. Now that we are past the protests, in sense, for many Americans, let's make the policy gets changed too. So, for politicians that say one thing and then continue to vote the wrong way, or worse yet, say one thing in public and then think when no one is recording them in private donor conversations, say another thing, that is really telling about what we need to do in our country. And I guess the last thing I'd say is, we're having a larger conversation around criminal justice issues, police accountability, and reform. And I've talked to so many members of law enforcement, good men and women who take an oath to protect and serve. And I'll tell you, the vast majority of them tell me they want more tools to do their job well. And they are tired and disgusted at the folks that would abuse their oath, that would abuse the trust they've given, because it makes everybody else's job harder to do. And so, I was proud to be able to support a recent budget that helps to provide more tools. We should frankly have more funding for social workers, mental health workers. I was proud to be able to have funding for things like mental health for our police officers. But, this isn't an either or conversation. And unfortunately, we see so many politicians try to use scare tactics instead of actually advancing real change.
Yeah, I know this is a constantly evolving issue, and it's really refreshing to hear someone like you talk about the real solutions that you've implemented, especially in contrast to your opponent, who's remained largely ineffectual and silent. So moving on to my last question. Rural America is often forgotten about and left behind by congressional leaders. So how do you plan to invest in rural communities and address the challenges that they face?
I was born and raised in South Dakota, so, this is not my first time on a farm. I'll tell you that rural communities need additional investment. And one thing I think is really interesting about where we're at right now is that because of changes in technology and because of potential significant green infrastructure investment, we could unlock the next 100 years of small town America, where your ability to seek economic advancement, to have the next best idea, isn't dependent on being in near proximity to where the centers of capital is, or where the largest lab is. So this is something that we can get right if we can get the right investment. And the recipe for rural America, there's some things we just got to do now, right? Telecom has been choking off the ability to create high-speed internet in our rural communities. They keep wanting investment from the federal government or the state government, then they fail to actually put in the broadband that would actually reach people's homes. I'm a big proponent. I've actually stood on the floor and I've said that we need to break that monopoly power so we can have unlock more innovation. And by the way, if we're paying these telecoms to, in theory, be laying more rural broadband, how come they get to then throttle the speeds? How come they get to sell your data? I had amendments that would have protected these issues, and they were unfortunately defeated in the legislature. I want to take, though, that fight to Congress. The second thing is, every one of our rural communities, our smaller communities, they need great schools, and they absolutely need help to thrive on their commerce as well. So we should make sure, as we're funding things from the state, that we're able to recognize the unique challenges that smaller rural schools have and be able to fund them. Third, we got to make sure that we have all the other utilities, clean power, fresh water. These are the kind of things that I think more of our communities will continue to struggle with, especially as we're grappling with the legacy of pollution and groundwater contamination in so many places. So these are a couple of things that we can get right. And then, of course, so agriculture is so important to so many of our rural communities. And we've got to get it right in terms of international trade. We've got to make sure that our growers, our makers, our movers can sell their products fairly in the world market. And I'm ready to work for that.
Well, it sounds like that when you're elected, Michigan's 6th District will get someone who really understands the issues. So next up, I want to introduce Tarazik, our Friends of Intelligent Democracy's policy director, to ask the next couple questions.
Absolutely. And hi, and we're going to take a quick trip. And I know this is not quite professional, but my dog, Benjamin, really needs to go outside. So, when you're the dog dad, you got to do this stuff.
Well, this is just Zoom campaigning.
You're getting sort of the inside tour. Come on, Benjamin. So anyway, yes.
Hi, John.
Hi.
I have my puppy at my feet as well, so I completely understand. First and foremost, I just want to say that as a student who studies public health, and as a pharmacy technician as well, I spend every day at work trying to fight to get people's insurance companies to pay for their medications, and I just care so much about your platform and everything you're trying to do for the people. So first of all, thank you for that. I wanted to circle back to the conversation about education because you made a lot of passionate statements in your introduction about education. So my question for you was, what do you think are the biggest challenges to education reform, and how do you plan on addressing these challenges in Congress?
Well, thank you. And I appreciate the indulgence for the field trip for a moment. Benjamin is feeling better now.
That's what's important.
So I come from a family of teachers and educators, and so I love talking about education. I think that we need to invest more in our public schools, our teachers, our school personnel, and then empower parents and teachers to be able to maximize their educational opportunities. I'm in Michigan. We're home of Betsy DeVos. And she has had a destructive agenda that has consistently attacked public schools. And unfortunately, she's also one of the largest supporters, or the DeVos family, of my opponent, Fred Upton. So we know where his loyalty lies. I'm proud to be endorsed by numerous teaching and educational organizations because I've built a track record of actually standing up for our public schools. But here's where I think we need to go moving forward. First, we need a funding formula across our school for all of our schools that take into account equity. So some of the best researchers note that not every student comes with the same level of preparedness, and that there are challenges that we can overcome by wrapping around additional support. So let's acknowledge this reality and then pay for that. Second, I do think we need some sort of minimum standards across the country. I think that's a good thing, but I think we've maybe gone a little too far in terms of standardizing, having so many standardized tests and the impact that that's had. If we hire great teachers and we give them good goalposts, they will ultimately then be able to produce and direct and help each one of our students thrive. That means we also have to stop attacking teachers, because frankly, they've been attacked and the profession's been demonized consistently for over 10 years now. And as a result, you can actually see the declining number of students that are going into education programs. The other thing, though, I think that we can do, particularly the federal government, is look at our special education and reimbursement rates. We've seen some updates to the IDEA, but we ultimately need to make sure that we are recognizing that it is one of the best things the federal government can do is provide that equalization in terms of more support. So every student has an opportunity to thrive in our public schools. So I think those are maybe 3 things we could do, and I'm sure there's a ton more.
I completely agree. And I guess my one hope is that maybe the pandemic has taught some parents just how hard being a teacher can be. I know that I've seen a lot of parents, at least in my life, being like, wow, this is really hard. So I guess that's my hope, is that maybe there's a little learning right now going on.
I mean, I would say, right, like, first, parents who have been dealing with this, you are heroes. I appreciate it, right? Heroes. And then my heart just goes out to every single teacher who in the spring figured out how to flip their curriculum on a dime and make it work. And now you see these incredible innovations where they are doing the best they can with the virtual schools that they have in front of them. But yeah, I will just say one last thing on this. This is a reminder, though, that there is no amount of distraction, right, between misleading ads. There's no amount of what's ever going to be tweeted about today that can distract a parent who is trying to help their kindergartner have virtual school. You know what I mean? It's just such a reality. It's such a reality reminder that it didn't have to be this way. It didn't have to be this bad.
I completely agree. Okay, I'm going to turn our conversation a little bit to veterans and healthcare. So my question is, how will you work to make sure the veterans who serve our country will be taken care of in regards to healthcare, benefits, and education?
So, this is one where there is so much more that we could do for our veterans. I've got veterans in my family. My grandfather served, my uncle served, and I want to make sure that we are supporting our veterans. So a couple of things. First, as I would say, particularly for Michigan, we are consistently ranked as one of the worst states for serving veterans. We've constantly been at the bottom of this. And so this demands that we hold the folks who, should be dealing with our federal veteran issues accountable. Fred Upton has been there for 34 years. Why are we still at the bottom of this? As a state legislator, I partnered with folks like Winnie Brinks as we fought to improve, our state-run veteran homes. I mean, I know what it's like to go in and make sure that we can tackle a problem and then solve it to support our veterans. And I'm ready to keep doing that at the federal level. We saw recently as our veterans in Michigan are now paying more for their veteran health care because of some of the choices that have been made. And so as a result, this system isn't working. And these are folks who we made a commitment to, that if you serve our country, that we'll continue to make sure you get the health care that you need. I'm someone who believes in honoring those commitments. I also think, though, there's plenty we can do for veterans that are returning, and they're figuring out what their next chapter of life is going to be. So, a couple of things. One is I've been proud to vote for a number of regulatory changes that made it so more of the skills that you learned or you were certified in your service could then apply for certification right here in some of our licensed trades. I think that's a great idea. I think we could expand that in more places across the country. I think that we could expand educational opportunities for veterans that are coming back. And so, really be able to help them figure out what their next set of career opportunities will be for themselves and their family. I also think that one of the other, in addition to all the things that you say you want to do, it's important to remind folks what I'm not going to do. And so I'm always going to be working against privatizing our Veterans Administration and other issues that are providing care, because right now there's a number of places that are trying to come in and privatize those services, and it would hurt the services for our veterans. And by the way, you can learn more about this issue or many of our issues at jonhoadley.com/issues. And you can actually see our Providing for Our Veterans plan.
Thank you so much. No, I completely agree. I think if we're going to have individuals laying their life on the line for our country, then we should be doing everything possible in terms of education, healthcare, et cetera, because that's the very least we can do. All right. I have a broader question for you if
Sure.
you're ready. What do you think is the biggest threat to our democracy right now?
I think, that's hard because I think democracy is being challenged in a number of ways. So first, I think at its core, democracy is about voting. And so I really worry about forms of voter suppression, whether it's rules that are meant to undermine the valid casting of ballots. The efforts that we've seen to do things like set up fake drop boxes to then confuse voters and potentially remove ballots. I worry about the efforts that we saw out of the Trump administration for the post office that was going to potentially slow down ballot delivery. These are the kind of things that I really worry about. It's also one of the reasons in Michigan, myself and at the time Representative Gretchen Driscoll, who's actually also running for Congress this cycle, we introduced a voter bill of rights, a version of which that looked very similar to what we introduced was passed by voters at the ballot in 2018. So I'm a big believer that we should expand the John Lewis Voting Rights Improvement Act, the voter bill of rights. We should continue to do this across the country. The second big piece, though, that I'm worried about, especially now that we're moving past the census, which I think unfortunately the Trump administration cut short in terms of collection, is that we'll be doing redistricting, and gerrymandering is a problem in so many of our states. Again, this is an area that I had introduced legislation on that would have had a nonpartisan Michigan Redistricting Commission. Ultimately, voters passed something that created the exact same thing once we got it out by going around the legislature because my Republican colleagues wouldn't take it up. But I think that as we draw the next set of maps, that at its core, voters are supposed to choose their politicians, not politicians choosing which voters they want to vote for them. And we should apply those nonpartisan redistricting standards across the country so folks can't rig maps and then ultimately disenfranchise or devalue people by the way they draw lines. The third big piece I think we need to see reforms on is money in politics. Y'all, it costs too much money to run campaigns. And as a result, there's so much outside influence and spending in these elections. And so I would love to see some sort of campaign finance reform. I would vote for HR 1, which would have been the largest campaign finance reform and ethics reform since Watergate. Fred Upton voted no on it. And then the last thing, though, is I do worry about our independent media. And, when we have someone like President Trump who has sowed disinformation, and I look at the way that keeps showing up in so many of the media reports, news articles. It just reminds me that how important to have free and independent media really is. But I want to push them to do their job. You can't just say, they said this, they said that, you decide. We need to make sure that we're restoring some objectivity here, because there really are things that are true and not true. And media is one of the best ways that should be independent and helping us decipher that information.
I completely agree. As a student, the way that they've started teaching how to do research just in the past few years has changed because of this new doubt that has been spread in terms of, what is accurate information, what is objective information, all of that. So I completely agree.
I mean, at the town hall, like just last night, President Trump was sowing disinformation that came out of QAnon like conspiracy theories. So, I mean, this has to stop.
What is going on?
Right? So we have to send a really clear message this election.
I completely agree. Okay, so Jon, why is it so important that we win Michigan's 6th?
I mean, like, the fate of the free world depends on it. No, I mean, right? Like, we need your help. We need your help. There's a couple of reasons, right? Like, we've already talked about how important it would be to make sure that we maintain control of Congress, how the impact this has on races up and down the ticket, stopping Mitch McConnell or defeating Donald Trump. We also know that this could be the backstop in the event that it goes to a vote of Congress. But beyond that, there are policy issues. We have a chance to elect someone that has fought for more healthcare, that is ready to make sure that we stand up for the environment, that wants to see ethics reform, the money in politics reform. You know, I'm running against a guy who's taken $7.5 million from corporate PACs, including $1.5 million from big pharma that are encouraging him to keep prices high. Some of whom are being sued for their role in the opioid crisis. This speaks to why we need change. And one other thing, and because we haven't talked on it, but my race has actually had the most homophobic attacks in the country leveled at us. And these have been debunked. In fact, the Detroit Free Press just did something on it today, calling all these allegations mostly false because they are intentionally distorting things. But I'll say this, the best way to beat a bully is by beating them at the ballot box. We have to show that these type of bullying and homophobic ads have no place in 2020. And if we want to then change the type of folks that are going to represent us, people who are authentic and have, raised their hand to serve, then we need to make sure that these attacks can't win. And that's what I need your help to do.
We need to send a message, and I am completely on board with that. All right. Thank you so much for answering my questions. I'm going to turn it back over to our amazing executive director, Charlie. Thank you.
Thanks, Tara. All right. So we're getting close to time, so I don't know if we'll have time for an audience Q&A tonight. But what I wanted to just talk about really quick is, number one, what our organization is doing to help you, and then also how the people watching tonight can support your campaign. So in the comment section, I put a bunch of links on how to financially support the campaign, how to support the campaign with their time, and then also where they can go and read about you and the policies you support. Our organization will be supporting your campaign financially and with our time as well, and we hope that everyone else can as well. And just so that we do get a couple audience questions in, I'm actually going to turn it over to Connor, who is going to start us off.
I'll do rapid fire.
Okay.
Hi, Jon. Thank you for joining us again tonight. All right. So for our first question, just so we can get through as many as possible, do you have any advice for young LGBTQ plus people who want to run for office in the future?
Get involved. The best experience is being honest about yourself, and then pick a campaign, anyone you like, and pour yourself into it. You learn so much by doing, and people will learn from you and your life experiences too.
Couldn't agree more. And I just wanted to thank you again for your fervent activism on behalf of the LGBTQ plus community throughout your entire career. I really am inspired by that. So for our second question, what is one thing that you've been doing during COVID to stay positive while we're all apart during this crazy, hectic time?
Yeah, so I definitely was baking a lot, and now I have to make sure I start working out a little bit more because I've definitely put on a little weight, so I got to fix that. But I really do love, for me, like cooking makes me happy, and getting to share that with others, and so that's what I've been doing.
Amazing. So on that similar COVID vein, how has COVID-19 been affecting your campaign?
For many months, we normally would be out knocking doors. We were making phone calls and sending texts. By the way, you can make phone calls or send texts from anywhere. So that, I think, was a big change. And just recently, we did start up, or the One campaign, excuse me, and the Biden campaign started up socially distant, in-person door knocking, mostly for the outdoor sort of homes. And so that's been a change. We're seeing some more activity in that in the last few weeks. But it does speak to how important it is that we have the resources to reach every one of our voters. Because normally we'd just be able to knock every single door and have multiple conversations. And it looks a little different this year.
So we've been talking a lot about environmental protection, and just being a Michigander, we're just curious, how do you hope to protect the Great Lakes?
Oh yeah, we absolutely have to protect the Great Lakes. And I mean, I think that means if you really want to protect the Great Lakes, it's not just enough whenever the Trump administration tries to cut funding that you then like say, I got the funding restored. Like we should actually move to like a 5-year funding cycle for the Great Lakes. We should have some more predictability on that work. And I've been proud to do things like not only stand up for our drinking water and make sure that we're fighting to keep, forever chemicals out of our fresh water, but also have done things like help secure funding for, interstate dam projects that will keep Asian carp out of the Great Lakes, right? So there's just so many things we can do. And I think you have to do them all because we got the 20% of the world's fresh water. Let's protect it.
Great. Thanks so much, Connor. All right, so we have come right up to the end of our event. So I just wanted to turn it back to you for any last words before we end the stream tonight.
No, I really appreciate y'all putting this together. This was super fun. And there's still plenty of time to help make a difference. So anyone who's watching, I know that we've seen the links, jonhoadley.com/join us. There's ways that you can sign up to volunteer. There's ways that you can give. There's ways that you can share our social media content. Let's finish the next 18 days strong. I'm going to wake up on November 4th and know that I've done literally everything I could to change the course of the country. And I want you to feel the exact same way.
Awesome. Great. Thanks so much, Jon. And thank you for everyone watching, whether live or on the archive stream. And most importantly, please stay safe and please stay healthy.
Thanks, everybody.